Hey Fish Fam, today let's look at one of the questions that really has the hobby divided. Do fish feel pain? Yes. Yes they do. Alright, we'll see you guys next time. Okay, joking aside, let's look at this question and the different things that it entails. If you couldn't tell from the title of the video, this is going to be a complicated topic with multiple parts. I'm going to be trying to summarize the work of about 100 people over the last 400 years. So, strap in. Today we're going to take a 30,000-foot view. We're going to define some terms, and we're going to look at what the question itself actually means. This is going to be a series where I look at a lot of stuff that I find really interesting, borrowing pretty heavily from the 2016 volume of Animal Sentience, supplementing it pretty heavily with stuff that I find fascinating or things that I think that the people involved in that discussion should have known at the time. Why these when I haven't finished my series on water chemistry yet? Because I'm still doing quite a bit of research to make sure that I get those things completely correct. I'm somebody that does systems administration for a living. I'm not a biologist, I'm not a chemist, so I need to make sure that I know what I'm talking about before I talk to you guys about it. And besides that, it's my channel, so shut up. No, I'm just kidding, I love you guys. The question of pain in this context is really a question of qualia. And I don't mean that garbage herbal supplement they're trying to sell online, trying to convince you that it'll make you smarter. I mean the philosophical idea of experiencing things. When we talk about experiencing something, there is first the physical reactions that we have to it. Let's say you take a bite of cake. There are a long string of chemical reactions that start to occur the moment you put it in your mouth. But our emotional, subjective response to it, that's qualia. Does it make you happy? Sad? Angry that they put so much icing on it? Why is there always so much icing on cake? Why is there always so much icing on the cake? Sorry about that. So when we look at the question of pain, we're really talking about two separate things. The first of which is the raw physical response, the nerve impulses that happen. And this is something that has been termed nociception, which I think is kind of a stupid name because if you look at the breakdown of it, it really means to feel hurt. When you put your hand on a hot stove and you pull it back immediately before you even really register that it's hot, this is a reflex action, something that's been termed nociflexive response. And the way that this happens is the nerve endings in your fingers pick up the signal, send it to your spine immediately recognizes that there's danger, sends back a response for your arm to pull back, and only then does it forward the signal to your brain. And that's when the actual emotional processing happens. And that emotional processing is what's now called pain. Now I take a little bit of issue with this relabeling of things because in my mind, pain has always been a physical sensation, and the emotional response to pain, sadness, anger, arousal? I don't know. I don't judge. Those things are emotional responses, and it could be because I'm a sufferer of chronic pain. But I feel like really these separations, these distinctions have been made, trying to call pain an emotion, because people really want to say that people are special and unique among the animal kingdom, even if it's only in our ability to be emo. Right, so nociception and pain. Well, no, it's not really that simple either, because a lot of things seem to have the nerves to process the harmful stimuli, and they have behaviors that look like they're trying to avoid it, but they aren't really. So there's an insect, I don't remember exactly what it is. It's probably fruit flies, because anytime you think of any research study with bugs, it's always fruit flies. Anyways, the larvae have a rolling response to avoid danger. They have nociceptors, pain receptors, for heat and pressure and light. And if you take something like a hot needle and you move it towards their larva, the larva will tumble out of the way. And this seems like they feel the heat and they're trying to escape it. But if you pay attention to the direction that they always tumble the same direction. So if you come in with the needle here, it will tumble into the needle and stab itself. And this is a pretty stupid response, but it works for survivability, because it's really trying to avoid a parasitic wasp, and it's a situation where the ones that tumble don't get stabbed by the wasp, and the ones that don't tumble get filled with eggs and parasitic babies and die, which is gruesome. Okay, I stopped for a second, I went looking, it is fruit flies. Here's a video of them doing this when somebody turns on a blue light. Blue light. That's not painful or dangerous or anything. They do it anytime there's something weird, essentially. So this is different than the kind of thing we see in mammals. In mammals, when something hurts, they actively try to avoid it. If you have an injured leg, you limp, or you'll lick at it, or rub at it, depending on your species. But fruit flies always do exactly the same action, even if it means rolling into the thing that you're trying to avoid. But there's still some subjective experience in fruit flies. They can learn that things are good or bad. So if you put in strawberries, and every time they land on the strawberries you give them an electric shock, they will start to anticipate that the smell of strawberries means something bad is going to happen, and they'll go away. There's a gene called white, which seems to control how quickly this happens, and some mutations of white cause the fruit flies to grossly over-exaggerate how bad something actually is, so they learn these avoidance behaviors much faster than they otherwise would, and it takes them a lot longer to get over these bad experiences and to begin trusting strawberries again. Basically, the fly's genes are giving them trauma. Fun little fact, the human equivalent of this gene is also heavily at play in panic and anxiety disorders among people. So if you're somebody that can't seem to get your anxiety under control, blame white. Okay, so fruit flies have some basic avoidance behavior, even if it's pretty terrible. They remember painful things happening to them, and they seem to have the capacity to tell the difference between really good things and really bad things, or slightly good things and slightly bad things, and something being really bad or really good will change their behavior faster. But they don't have a response which suggests a recognition of injury. You know, if you pull a muscle in your arm, you're going to rub at it, because rubbing at it makes it feel better. This is a common thing that people do, because it alters the nerve response, which alters the way that you're going to process it in your brain. Stub your toe, you'll limp. End up with a cut, you're probably not going to let somebody sit and poke at it for a while. Fruit flies don't do those things. So, do fruit flies process injuries? Seems so. Do they process it emotionally? Pretty unlikely. So, mammals, I would say, definitely experience pain based on behavior analysis, based on the fact that we ourselves are mammals, and insects arguably don't. Fish are somewhere in the middle. So what do we know about them? First, we need to look at the arguments against them feeling things emotionally, their emotional processing of things. And the two most vocal critics of this are Brian Key and James Rose. And these two people are the people that are almost universally brought out in forums or Facebook groups or anywhere else when somebody says, hey, I think my fish is in pain, or if there's an article in the newspaper or something else, you know, magazine things, whatever, people want to talk about it. These two guys are the ones that are brought up to say, no they don't, look at this thing that James Rose wrote, where he's criticizing Sneddon and all these other people, and he's picking apart their research and showing that they don't show that it's anything except nociception, and there's no possible processing going on, okay? These two people are really the only people that we need to worry about in this. And these two people are extreme skeptics, to the point that Rose says things like, we can't even be sure that other mammals experience pain. And that's an insane stance to take, especially for me to swallow, because I'm married to somebody that's doing veterinary science studies, where things like the Glasgow Pain Index are just accepted as valid. They're just part of practice. There's a thought experiment called a philosophical zombie, and it is the idea that a person may behave as if they have consciousness but not have it. So in this example, you would say, You stab somebody with a stick and they will pull away. They will say, ouch. And they may even tell you that it hurts and that it distresses them, but none of those things are true. They're just really complex, learned behaviors. Kind of like when a psychopath pretends to feel remorse or guilt. They don't. They can't. They've learned to fake it. It's sort of how you might think of a really complicated, believable android being programmed. It doesn't really feel those things, but it behaves as if it does for our benefit. And James Rose appears to believe that this is possibly the case for mammals, since we can obviously see them doing things like trying to remove the feeling and make things better. And when people try to point this out to him, that his arguments are basically, people are special and people are the only ones that can possibly feel it, then he immediately backpedals and denies it, even though that's exactly what his arguments come to. My wife has an ag professor who she regularly gets into arguments with, because he'll say things like animals don't have cognitive thought, and she'll go, what? And she'll present an example of cognitive thought. You know, let's say you have a pet dog, and you take the dog for walks, and when you do it you say, hey, you want to go for a walk? The dog figures out what walk means, because the dog is paying attention, and the dog is always trying to learn more about you, because they want to be social, and they want attention, and they want rewards. So, the dog learns the word, and later, when you're having a conversation with somebody else, you say, you know, I think I really need to get out and walk a little bit more. And the dog hears this, and the dog goes nuts, because the dog is anticipating that walk means that you're going to go for a walk with the dog. And her professor will say, no, that's just learned behavior. Cognitive thought is the ability to reason and learn. You have to be able to pay attention to learn something. You have to be able to focus to learn. That's what it means. You can't say it's not cognitive thought, it's just learned behavior, because learning is cognitive thought. So the issue is that, first, her professor doesn't really have any idea what the hell he's talking about, but secondly, that he's incapable of accepting when he's wrong. And I feel very strongly that Key and Rose may be in a very similar situation. To explain why I feel that way, we're really going to have to look at their arguments, because I can't just make an attack on them as people and say, well, ignore them, because they're incapable of admitting to being wrong. We have to say, you know, are their arguments good or bad? It doesn't matter if they can accept that they are wrong or not. Are their arguments good or bad? And Key says, oh my god, is that actually his picture? What? Like, okay, look, I'm an overweight guy that needs to get haircuts more regularly and tends to have really bad facial hair, so I'm maybe the worst person in the world to criticize this, but what is going on here? Anyways, sorry. Key says, the argument is made that we can't know how a fish feels, so we should give them the benefit of the doubt. This is specious because we assume we know how our friends and family feel when we do things, because they have similar brains, they have similar neural hardware, and we're usually correct in our assumption. But we apply the same behavior to other animals, anthropomorphizing their behavior, seeing their behaviors the way we would see a person, and this is faulty reasoning. Now, he didn't say it exactly like that, he convoluted it with 30 times as many sentences because he's incapable of saying something clearly. So far he's right. Not only can we not assume how animals feel about something, how they experience it, we can't even reasonably know how other people experience something. If you spend any time around teenagers, you probably know they can be fairly difficult, because they haven't learned to process things the way that adults have. They haven't learned what behaviors are really annoying. They haven't learned how selfish behaviors affect other people emotionally, because in their interactions with other people that do these things all the time, they have to brush them off. If they didn't, they wouldn't get along with them. And the same thing happens with people in abusive households, who will do things that are kind of cruel without thinking about it, because You know, my dad does it, and my dad loves me, so it must not be that bad. And it stops you from really being able to process the fact that somebody else finds it really irritating. There's also the case of mental illnesses. Depression makes people feel like a burden when they're not. It makes them close in and isolate themselves when other people want to be close to them. Borderline personality can make you completely misunderstand the intentions of other people, so that somebody that's having a casual conversation with you, just the bare minimum of nicety, will just seem like they're the most fascinating, wonderful person in the world, and you'll fall madly in love with them when they have no interest in you at all. Autism can make you miss a lot of things because you don't care about them personally. I have a lot of issues with remembering to even comb my hair in the morning because I don't care. I don't care what other people's hair looks like. I don't see myself in a mirror. So if we can't even know how each other feel, what hope can we possibly have to know what a fish is experiencing? And it's easy to say, well, if you don't know, then we should probably just assume that they do feel it and proceed as if they did. We should act accordingly, give them the benefit of the doubt. And Key's response to this is kind of nonsensical. He says, if we take it at face value, we may feel we are doing no harm. Okay. But then he brings up vaccines, and that faulty MMR study by Andrew Wakefield, the one that claimed to find a link between autism and vaccination, that was done as part of a court case where he was getting paid to find a result. And this is a study which has since been withdrawn. He had his medical license revoked. Dozens and dozens of studies have come out since, showing that there's no connection between the two things. None at all. And Key says, if we take the study at face value, then people choose not to vaccinate, and they'll cause harm to their children, their neighborhoods, and their entire countries because they tried to play it safe. And yeah, somebody listening to a know-nothing celebrity instead of their doctor for their medical decisions is harmful. But that's a fault in understanding who should qualify as an authority with knowledge, and it's a failure to look into things. I feel pain is direct knowledge. It's not an appeal to authority. Nobody told me that I feel pain. I just do. So to infer that others feel pain and that other animals feel pain is really a completely different thing than saying, a homeless guy told me that strawberries are the devil and cause cancer, so I'm just not going to eat strawberries anymore to be safe. In one case, you're assuming something is true based on no evidence because an authority said so, and on the other, you're assuming something is true from personal experience. And they're both faulty logic, but they aren't even remotely connected. So the game that Key is playing here is a complex guilt by association fallacy blended with false equivalency. This argument assumes a positive and it's harmful, therefore this other assumed positive is harmful.
You and I? We're the same.
I don't know if he's doing it on purpose. Every single thing that he says is like this. It's just a bunch of unconnected, irrelevant things that he says as if they're making the point for him. I'm not going to dismiss all of his arguments because he's made one bad argument. I'm going to look at the things that are relevant individually, and we're going to discuss what has merit and what has major problems. But this kind of flawed logic, this broken thinking, this seemingly deliberate attempt to trick the reader into thinking that something is true because something unrelated is true, is a constant theme when you read anything that this guy's written. Like this. Accepting at face value that fish feel pain may seem like a harmless alternative, but it has led to inappropriate approaches to fish welfare. Then he references a paper here, this Arlinghouse one. And that's arguing that treating fish as if they feel pain is unfair, and it places a financial burden on fisheries to prove that they don't, or to do appropriate action as if they do. It also says that while fish may feel something, there isn't any evidence that they feel enough to grant them rights. So when people try to ban hobby fishing and things like that, that it's not necessarily an appropriate response, and it's a major inconvenience, and that animal liberation groups really aren't doing anything that follows what the science says. And I'm sorry, but it hurts us financially and inconveniences my weekend doesn't have anything to do with fish wellness. Nothing. You cannot conflate those two things. He immediately follows this up with, while there is no convincing scientific evidence for the ability of fish to feel pain, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And I want to touch on that briefly before we go into Key and Rose's evidence of absence, because the game that Rose and Key play when evaluating any evidence in any studies is this. A study comes out. Let's say it's one where they inject acid into the fish's lips, and the fish are seen to rub the lips on things as if they're trying to alleviate pain, and it's a weak indication of feeling pain emotionally. And Key and Rose will take this paper and they will say, this is very weak evidence, and there's no other supporting evidence for this at all. There are no other studies that suggest that this is something that's happening, which makes this even weaker, and we cannot assume this is what's happening, so we need to take this study and we just need to throw it out, because it's no good, there's no reason to assume that it's there. And then another study comes out, which shows something similar, and they go, there are no other studies that have shown anything like this, so there's no reason to assume that this is here, because they've taken every single instance of evidence that would allow you to try to build a complete picture of this, and thrown it away and disregarded it, and they're looking at every single thing independently. They're doing exactly the thing that just a few paragraphs earlier in this paper, Rose warned against with the autism study. Yes, you can look at a single autism study and draw the conclusion that it might be harmful, but if you look at all of them, there's only one out of the dozens, possibly hundreds, of studies that have been done on this. There's only one that shows any sort of link, and that one has been pulled, widely dismissed, and shown to have major methodological flaws. You have to look at the body of work to draw a conclusion. And that is not what they're doing. They're very, very deliberately isolating things and saying this doesn't stand on its own, therefore it's trash, therefore we never have to think about it again. And basically anything that anybody ever says as far as demonstrating fish behaviors that imply that they may feel pain, these people treat exactly the same way. Every single one is done exactly the same way. This is a problem. You can't have a discussion with somebody, and you can't sway somebody's opinion if they just think that they're right to start with. So I know at the beginning of this, I said, yes, they do. But I want you to forget about that as we go forward, and I want you to think about the evidence that I might talk about and the things that other people have to say on this subject, so you can really evaluate everybody's suggestions rather than just listening to Key and Rose because they're neuroscientists and they like to assume that the human brain is what everything else is modeled on, that if something works for us a particular way, that it has to work that way for everybody else, and it doesn't. Birds are well known to have rich emotional lives, and they have radically different brain structures from us. And part of why we can't take assumptions like that, part of why we can't just draw a line and say, well, it works this way for us, so it must work this way for other things, is that we separated from fish like 300 million years ago. So they've had a lot of time to adapt and change since then, just like we have. Our brains have not remained the same. There have been major advances in fish brains to the point that some fish appear to be capable of using tools at this point. We will talk more about that a little bit later, but with our understanding of what allows people tool use, fish don't have that part of the brain, so to say, well, they don't have a neocortex, so they can't feel pain, doesn't necessarily follow. In the next part of this, we'll look at what it means to suggest that pain exists only in the brain, and what kinds of things happen with the spine that are really insanely complicated and complex and might lead us to making some really bad assumptions about this just from our intuition. We'll see you guys then.